Let's start with ecosystem, chapter 12 of class 12 biology. One of the last chapters, actually. Ecosystem. Let's see the main topics: ecosystem, structure and function, productivity, decomposition, energy flow, ecological pyramids. These are the main topics of this chapter, that is ecosystem. It's a small chapter. Let's finish it. An ecosystem can be visualized as a functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. What is an ecosystem? We can call ecosystem as a functional unit of nature. Okay? And what does this functional unit represent? It represents the interaction between living organisms and the physical surrounding, or we can say interaction between biotic and abiotic factors is known as an ecosystem. Ecosystem varies greatly in size from a small pond to a large forest or even sea. Many ecologists regard the entire biosphere as a global ecosystem. Some ecologists even meaning like they even think that the whole biosphere, it's they consider it as a global ecosystem. They consider it as a composite of all local ecosystems on Earth. Since this system is too much big and complex to be studied at one time, it is convenient to divide it into basic categories, of which we have two are given for us: the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Okay, because although we can consider the whole global or all of the biosphere as a single ecosystem, it is hard to study the whole ecosystem efficiently and usefully. So, for our usefulness and efficiency in studying and gaining from knowing our ecosystem, we divide it into smaller ecosystems. And the first categorization is terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Forest, grassland, desert are some examples of terrestrial ecosystems. Okay, pond, lake, wetland, river, and estuary are some examples of an aquatic ecosystem. This might be a new word, estuary. What is this estuary? Okay, an estuary is a particular partially enclosed coastal area where fresh water from rivers mixes with the salt water from the sea, creating a unique and highly productive ecosystem. The only thing we need to learn about what this estuary is: the junction or the place where fresh water from rivers mixes with salt water from sea. It is near a coastal area. It's an enclosed coastal area where seawater or fresh water meets with seawater is known as an estuary. Contain brackish water, blend of fresh water and salt water. I guess not much is needed for that. Let's continue. Crop fields aquarium may also be considered as man-made ecosystem. Like we can consider crop fields. We saw the examples of terrestrial and aquatic. Here are examples of man-made ecosystem or artificial ecosystem, that is crop field and an aquarium. It is not a complete ecosystem, it is man-made. We will first look at the structure of the ecosystem. In order to appreciate the input, that is productivity, transfer of energy, food chain, that is or web nutrient cycling, and the output, degradation and energy loss, we will also look at the relationships, cycles, chains, webs that are created as a result of these energy flows within the system and their interrelationship. Okay, they're just giving an introduction of what we will see in an ecosystem. Mainly in an ecosystem, the input is the productivity. We'll see what is productivity in the next topic. Transfer of energy, we have studied the basics of transfer of energy in or food chain, food web in our prior classes or earlier classes. And the output is degradation and energy loss. And let's continue reading. Ecosystem structure and function, this is the first topic after introduction. In earlier classes you have looked at the various components of the environment, abiotic and biotic. You studied how the individual biotic and abiotic factors affected each other and their surrounding. Let us look at these components in a more integrated manner and see how the flow of energy takes place within these components of the ecosystem. Okay, interaction of biotic and abiotic components results in a physical structure that is a characteristic for each type of ecosystem. Okay, what is this physical structure? Not mentioned, but they're saying that interaction, any kind of interaction between biotic and abiotic components, living and non-living components, results in a physical structure, and this structure differs from each type of ecosystem. We saw two types of ecosystem, terrestrial, aquatic. In these two ecosystems, both are ecosystem, which means both are an interaction between biotic and abiotic factors, but the structure or the type of interaction varies from one ecosystem to other ecosystem. Like we cannot say that a desert ecosystem and a sea ecosystem are exactly the same. They are ecosystem, they are interaction between living and non-living factors, but each type of ecosystem will have a different structure, a physical structure as mentioned here. Identification and enumeration of plant and animal species of an ecosystem gives its species composition. In a desert, or if we consider a desert, in a desert ecosystem, if we identify and number the plant and animal species of that specific desert ecosystem, or a specific place, or this much acres of land is a desert, and in that how many plants, what kind of animal species, all of these if we identify, then this will give a species composition of that specific desert ecosystem. Vertical distribution of different species occupying different levels is called as stratification. Not much, it's a important definition, but not much is there. Vertical distribution of different species occupying different levels is called as stratification. They give a example here which is easy to remember. For example, trees occupy the top vertical strata or layer of a forest. Shrubs, the second layer, and herbs and grasses occupy the bottom layers. For example, in a forest ecosystem, if we separate the species or types of plants in the most basic manner as trees, shrubs, and herbs, we can separate them into layers. We know that herbs and grasses are the shortest in size, so they occupy the bottom layer. Shrubs are taller than the herbs and grasses, so they occupy the second layer. Trees are the largest, so they occupy the topmost layer. Nothing much about it, just important definition to be remembered. Vertical distribution of different species occupying different levels is called as a stratification. Vertical distribution, they specifically mentioned vertical distribution here of different species occupying different levels. Okay, the components of the ecosystem are seen to function as a unit when you consider the following aspects. Okay, we can understand ecosystem as which can be parts of the ecosystem. We can say they gave components of the ecosystem, like what can comprise an ecosystem, or components of an ecosystem are seen to function as a unit when you consider the following aspects. All the components of the ecosystem in an ecosystem, that is living and non-living matter, they are seen to function as a single unit when we consider productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling. What they meant by saying these, an ecosystem is meant to function as a unit when we take these four factors, what they mean by that is probably that in all kinds of ecosystem, we saw different categories of ecosystems. They gave an example for us like desert, aquatic, sea, or whatever it might be. In all these ecosystems, these four factors, that is productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling, these are very common. No, these are common and a part of all these ecosystems. So this is a common factor, meaning all the ecosystem will play a part in showing these functions. Let's try to understand what these are to understand the whole concept. To understand the ethos of an aquatic ecosystem, let us take a small pond as an example. This is a fairly sustainable unit and rather simple example that can explain even the most complex interactions that exist in an aquatic ecosystem. Okay, the main points in this sentence that I just read is they consider that a pond is also a fairly self-sustainable ecosystem. They consider a pond as a complete ecosystem. That is the first main point. Pond, fairly sustainable unit. It's a complete ecosystem. It is self-sustainable ecosystem. That is important to remember here. Okay, let's continue reading. A pond is a shallow water body in which all the above mentioned four basic components of an ecosystem are well exhibited. Okay, what are the components of an ecosystem? We saw here the components of an ecosystem are productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling. Let's continue. What is a pond they described here? It is a shallow water body in which all the above four mentioned basic components of an ecosystem are well exhibited. The abiotic component is the water with all the dissolved inorganic and organic substances and the rich soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. This is also again an important info to be remembered. The abiotic component of a pond ecosystem, water with dissolved inorganic and organic substances and rich soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. Okay, let's continue. The solar input, the cycle of temperature, day length, and other climatic conditions regulate the rate of function of the entire pond. The autotrophic components include the phytoplankton, algae, and floating, submerged, and marginal plants found at the edges. The consumers are represented by the zooplankton, the free swimming and bottom dwelling forms. The decomposers are the fungus, bacteria, flagellates, especially abundant in the bottom of the pond. This system performs all the functions of any ecosystem and of the biosphere as a whole, that is, conversion of inorganic into organic material with the help of radiant energy of the sun by autotrophs, consumption of the autotrophs by heterotrophs, decomposition and mineralization of the dead matter, to release them back to reuse by the autotrophs. These events are repeated over and over again. This is a unidirectional movement of energy toward the higher trophic levels and its dissipation and loss as heat to the environment. Okay, that is a bunch of info. I will just underline or highlight the most important points. The autotrophic components of a pond ecosystem are phytoplankton, algae, floating submerged marginal plants found at the edges. Consumers are zooplankton. What are they? Free swimming and bottom dwelling forms. Decomposers are fungus, bacteria, flagellates, abundant at the bottom of the pond. Where are the bacteria and flagellates present? They are abundant at the bottom of the pond. Performs all functions as of any ecosystem and of the biosphere as a whole. The whole biosphere is can be considered a ecosystem, and every ecosystem performs the above four functions, that is productivity, decomposition, nutrient cycling, and energy flow. What is this main function? That is, what is the main function of an ecosystem? Conversion of inorganic into organic material with the help of radiant energy of the sun by autotrophs, consumption of the autotrophs by heterotrophs, decomposition, mineralization of the dead matter. Most of this we will study in the next parts of this chapter itself, repeated over and over again. And important line, there is unidirectional movement of energy towards higher trophic level. We will see much of that in next topic. Okay, what they are talking about here, in an aquatic ecosystem, if we take a pond as an example, a pond is a self-sustainable unit of an ecosystem. It is self-sustainable. It's a complete ecosystem. What is a pond? It is a shallow water body in which all the components or basic components of an ecosystem are performed or exhibited. We know that ecosystem is the abiotic. What is an ecosystem? We saw the definition. Ecosystem is a functional unit of nature which shows interaction between biotic and abiotic factors. So if we consider a pond as a ecosystem, then the abiotic component, there should be abiotic and biotic components in this pond. So what is the abiotic component? Abiotic component is the water, mainly it is water. Then we can consider the dissolved inorganic and organic substances in this water. And there is the bottom of the pond, which is rich soil deposit. Then what is the biotic factors, biotic components of this ecosystem? The biotic factors or biotic components are again divided into autotrophs and heterotrophs, or in our chapter it is more appropriate to call them as producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and so on. The autotrophs here are phytoplankton. In a pond ecosystem, the autotrophs are phytoplankton, algae, and submerged marginal plants found at the edges. And coming to the consumers, we have zooplankton and some free swimming bottom dwelling forms. And coming to the decomposers, which are as important as the producers and consumers, they are very, very important. The decomposers in a pond ecosystem are fungus, bacteria, and flagellates, which are abundant at the bottom of the pond. This system of a pond performs all the functions of an ecosystem. What is the function of an ecosystem? Conversion of inorganic into organic material with the help of radiant energy of the sun, that is done by autotrophs in form of photosynthesis, and consumption of autotrophs by heterotrophs for food, and decomposition and mineralization of the dead matter to release them back for the use of autotrophs. This is a cycle. Where do autotrophs get all the inorganic matter? From the dead and decaying matter, which are decomposed by the detritivores or basically decomposers. And where do the consumers get their food from? They get them from the autotrophs. Then where do decomposers get their food from? They get their food from dead matter, that is basically the remnants of either autotrophs or heterotrophs. And the cycle goes on. And the main source of energy is the sun. Nothing more important here. Okay, coming to Productivity, a constant input of solar energy, is a basic requirement for any ecosystem to function and to be sustained. For any kind of ecosystem, solar energy is the main source of energy, and without the solar energy, without an input of energy, a ecosystem cannot be sustained. Okay, let's read first and I'll explain later. Primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or inorganic matter produced per unit area over a time period by plants during photosynthesis. It is expressed in terms of weight, that is inverse, gram square inverse, or energy, kilocalorie per meter square. Okay, this is gram per meter square. G is gram and meter square is area. In terms of weight, it is gram per meter square. In terms of energy, it is kilocalorie per meter square. The rate of biomass production is called as productivity. It is expressed in terms of gram per meter square per year or kilocalorie per meter square per year. To compare the productivity of different ecosystems, it can be divided into gross primary productivity, GPP, and net primary productivity, NPP. Gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. A considerable amount of GPP is utilized by the plants in respiration. Gross primary productivity minus respiration loss is the net primary productivity known as NPP. An equation for NPP is GPP minus R. Net primary productivity is the available biomass for the consumption to heterotrophs, herbivores, and decomposers. Secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by consumers. Primary productivity depends on the plant species inhabiting a particular area. It also depends on the variety of environmental factors, availability of nutrients, photosynthetic capacity of plants. Therefore, it varies in different types of ecosystem. The annual net primary productivity of the whole biosphere is approximately 170 billion tons dry weight of organic matter. Of this, despite occupying 70% of the surface of Earth, the productivity of oceans are only 55 billion tons. The remaining, of course, is on land. Okay, there is nothing much here in productivity. So, what is productivity? We will see that the main source of energy to a ecosystem is a solar energy. That is the first sentence. Without solar energy, an ecosystem cannot be sustained. There might be other forms of energy, but the main direct source is the sun. Except a deep sea hypothermal ecosystems, those we will see later, but not much in detail. But in most of the biosphere, sun or solar energy is the main source of energy. Okay, what is we can understand productivity. What is but before that, what is primary production? They gave a definition for primary production in NCERT. Primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or inorganic matter produced per unit area over a time period by plants during photosynthesis. Primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or organic matter. It is defined as the amount of biomass or organic matter produced per unit area over a period of time by plants during photosynthesis. Okay, nothing much here. Where do plants produce? Okay, in an ecosystem, the main producers are plants, or basically autotrophs. In autotrophs, what do they produce using the energy? We can call it as biomass or organic matter. Plants utilize solar energy to produce biomass or organic matter. How can plants, or the what do we call the process of formation of or utilization of the solar energy? It is called photosynthesis. So combining all those definitions, primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or organic matter produced per unit area over a time period. We need to consider a specific time interval, so that is the reason we consider, normally we consider years, per year, produced per unit area over a period of time. So combining all that, we get a unit. Actually, we get two units. One is in terms of dry weight, like dry weight of organic matter produced, dry weight of organic matter produced or biomass produced, or we can get in terms of energy produced or energy like absorbed from the sun, or energy wise. Energy, CGS unit of energy is calorie, and we take kilocalorie here as calorie is too small of a unit to describe here. Okay, primary productivity is the rate of production of biomass or inorganic matter per unit area of land over a period of time during photosynthesis. That is the definition of primary productivity, and expressed in terms of gram. We consider dry weight here, very important to remember. We consider dry weight here as dry weight meaning excluding the water content, gram per meter square, or energy, calorie per meter square. Rate of biomass production is called productivity. We saw primary productivity. Now what is productivity? The rate of biomass production is called as productivity, and this productivity is expressed in terms of gram per meter square per year, gram per meter square of land per 1 year, or kilocalorie per meter square of land per year of time. Like, why we need this kind of thing? To compare the productivity of different ecosystem. We saw that different categories of ecosystem, aquatic, terrestrial, etc. We saw that although all the basic components are same in all ecosystems, the biotic factors and interaction, there is interaction between abiotic and biotic factors in all ecosystem, and the four basic functions of an ecosystem, that is productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling, all of these happen in all of the ecosystem. There is difference in physical structure. It was not explained much in the previous paragraph, but this is one of the comparisons here. Not only do the species or animals in that specific in different ecosystems vary, but even the productivity varies. To compare that productivity, we use these measures or units, that is gram per meter square or calorie per meter square per year. To compare productivity of different ecosystems, we use this. It's not very important, but so let's not highlight it. Okay, the main divisions, productivity can be divided into two types: gross primary productivity, GPP, or net primary productivity, NPP. What is gross primary productivity? Of gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. Okay, there is not much difference between productivity and gross primary productivity. Basically, gross primary productivity is the total amount of biomass created by the autotrophs after absorbing the sunlight. The total, every single, everything is included. We are not considering how the plant utilize the energy for growth or other kind of activities. Everything, it absorbs the sunlight, that much amount of energy you are considering. So this is called as gross primary productivity. But gross primary productivity is not very useful for next trophic levels. Like if a herbivore of if a cow eats a specific plant, it will not give all the energy it absorbed. Like let's assume there is a plant and it is eaten by a cow. Where does this plant get the energy from? From the sun. But before this cow eats this plant, let's assume the plant is a seed, and it will germinate, and slowly it will absorb the sunlight. For many days it will absorb, and it will grow. Something like this, a very bad drawing. But and let's assume a cow now eats this plant. Will this cow get all the energy that this plant absorbed from the sun? No, obviously not. Because most of the energy this plant absorbed from the sun must have been utilized for growth of this plant, and it is lost somewhere. For utilities of the plant, it is lost, like respiration losses of the plant. We can say for respiratory losses of the plant, most of the gross primary productivity is lost. So even if the cow eats the whole plant, it will not get the gross primary productivity amount of energy. There will be only some amount of energy the cow will get. So to understand that more clearly, we come up with a new concept, that is net primary productivity. A considerable amount of GPP is utilized by the plants in respiration. Gross primary productivity minus respiration losses is the net primary productivity, GPP minus R, which is equals to NPP. Net primary productivity is the available biomass for the consumption to heterotrophs, that is herbivores and decomposers. This is the net primary productivity is the available biomass for the consumptions to heterotrophs, herbivores and decomposers. Okay, that is with the gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. Now coming to the secondary productivity. What is secondary productivity? Not much description is given, just a single line. Secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by consumers. After they consume the autotrophs, they will also utilize that energy to form new biomass. They will also grow. So this new biomass is the production of this new biomass is known as secondary productivity. Primary productivity depends, like what does the factors, that is it with secondary productivity. Coming to the next topic, what are the factors which affect primary productivity? Primary productivity depends on plant species inhabiting a particular area. Like if the plants are very large in size or capability to grow very large in size, they produce much larger biomass than smaller grasses which do not have the capability to produce such a large biomass. And it depends on the plant species first, and depends on the variety of environmental factors, then availability of nutrients, then also the photosynthetic capacity of the plant. Therefore it varies in different types of ecosystem. Okay, that's it with that. They gave some information, calculated information for us. The net annual primary productivity of the whole biosphere is approximately 170 billion tons. This is a dry weight, important to remember, of organic matter. And they gave specifically of oceans are only 55 billion tons of the 170 billion tons of the contribution from the biosphere. Although the oceans occupy 70% of the Earth's surface area, they will only provide 55 billion tons of the productivity. The remaining comes from the land. Why there is low productivity of in the ocean? Okay, let's ask. Okay, they gave some specific reasons. Ocean productivity is lower than land productivity because the sunlight, nutrients, and suitable habitats are limited in most parts of the ocean, even though it covers 70% of the Earth's surface. If we assume in deep parts of the ocean, after a certain depth, almost no sunlight penetrates inside, meaning it will be pitch black, like there is almost no sunlight inside. So not much of the sunlight goes into the depths of the ocean, and suitable habitats and nutrients are also not available. Key reasons: they gave limited sunlight penetration. Photosynthesis requires light, but light only penetrates the upper 200, 100 to 200 meters of the ocean. The vast deep ocean remains dark, preventing phytoplankton growth. Nutrient scarcity, like essential nutrients, are absent. Like in land, soil recycles nutrients efficiently, but oceans rely on upwelling currents to bring nutrients to the surface. These occur only in specific regions. Dilution: the nutrients and organisms are spread across immense volumes of water, reducing the concentration compared to land ecosystem. Habitat constraint: productive zones are mainly near coastal areas. Only in the coastal areas, estuaries, and upwelling regions, there is a good amount of the nutrients habitat availability. Short-lived primary producers: oceans productivity depends on mainly phytoplanktons, which have like a rapid turnover but limited biomass at a given time. This is called as the standing crop or the inverted pyramid of biomass, which we will see later. On land, large trees store biomass for years, contributing to higher productivity. Okay, this much information is not needed for us. So let's continue reading the NCERT. Coming to the next topic: decomposition. You may have heard of the earthworm being referred to as a farmer's friend. This is because they help in the breakdown of complex organic matter as well as in loosening of the soil. Similarly, decomposers break down complex organic matter into inorganic substances like carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients, and the process is called as decomposition. Dead plant remains such as leaves, bark, flowers, and dead remains of animals, including fecal matter, constitute detritus, which is the raw material for decomposition. The important steps in the process of decomposition are fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, and mineralization. Detritivores, example as an earthworm, we can even consider mites, lice, wood lice. I'm not completely sure. We'll see more about it. Break down detritus into smaller particles. This process is called as fragmentation, the first step. We'll see more. I'll repeat or explain it once after reading. By the process of leaching, water soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil horizon and get precipitated as unavailable salt. Bacterial and fungal enzyme degrade detritus into simple inorganic substances. This process is called as catabolism. It is important to note that all the above steps in decomposition operate simultaneously on the detritus. Humification and mineralization occur during decomposition in the soil. Humification leads to accumulation of dark colored amorphous substance called as humus that is highly resistant to microbial action, undergoes decomposition at an extremely slow rate. Being colloidal in nature, it serves as a reservoir of nutrients. The humus is further degraded by some microbes and release of inorganic nutrients by the process known as mineralization. Decomposition is largely an oxygen requiring process. The rate of decomposition is controlled by the chemical composition of detritus and climatic factors. In a particular climatic condition, decomposition rate is slower if detritus is rich in lignin and chitin, and quicker if detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble like substances like sugars. Temperature and soil moisture are the most important climatic factors that regulate decomposition through their effects on the activities of soil microbes. Warm and moist environment favor decomposition, whereas low temperature and anaerobiasis inhibit decomposition, resulting in buildup of organic matter. Okay, not much is given here. First, they gave a friendly example of a decomposer which we are which we know about. They gave out about an earthworm. They referred to an earthworm as a farmer's friend, which everyone do refer to an earthworm as a farmer's friend. Why do they do so? Why is an earthworm known as a farmer's friend? Because earthworm help in breakdown of complex organic matter into simpler organic matter. Why we need to break down complex organic matter into simpler organic matter? Because plants take up nutrients in if we saw the essential nutrients of a plant or the essential things needed for a plant, it will most of the time never be complex organic molecules. It will be simple inorganic molecules like phosphate or potassium, calcium, or all these kind of inorganic elements. So we can understand that plants require simple inorganic matter which they convert into complex organic matter through a process called as photosynthesis. They themselves do not need complex organic matter in soil. So in the soil which is full of organic matter, when the earthworm breaks down this complex organic matter into simpler inorganic molecules, this will act this will improve the fertility of the soil. That is one of the help an earthworm will do. The second help is it will loosen the soil for aeration. They did not mention aeration here. Loosening the soil, the what is the importance of loosening the soil, or what is the use of loosening the soil? By loosening the soil, we can get two important uses for penetration of easier penetration of the root in deeper into the soil. Deeper into the soil, the root tip, if it is in a young stage, which will be very soft and tender. So if the soil is very hard, the root might not be able to penetrate the soil, so it can help in penetration or like for the deeper root growth. Second, for aeration meaning the roots themselves need exposure or oxygen to exposure or air exposure, we can say oxygen. They themselves need oxygen. In case of like, we saw a peculiar example of rhizophora like in pneumatic Pneumatic roots, or basically in mangrove forest where the soil is very clayey in nature, the soil is clumped together. So the roots will grow something like this. We have already pneumatophores. They will have holes, there will be holes in the roots which will help in gas exchange. This is a special adaptation of rhizophora, which is not in this chapter, but I mentioned it for some reason. Okay, so roots also, what we can understand from this example is roots also need oxygen, and by loosening up the soil, this will allow for more air to penetrate into the soil. This will help in aeration. That's about that. Let's continue. It's just a simple example, a friendly example given by the NCERT, not much attention to be paid. Similarly, decomposers break down. What do decomposers do? Decomposers break down complex organic matter into inorganic substances like carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients. We saw that, we know that the main important nutrients for photosynthesis is carbon dioxide, water, and inorganic substances. So, decomposers, which provide the plants with these inorganic substances or the main nutrients for photosynthesis, are obviously their best friends. Okay, so that is why decomposition is very helpful for autotrophs. What is decomposer again? What is decomposers do? They break down complex organic matter into inorganic substances. They can be carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients, and this whole breaking down process is called as decomposition. They gave something known as detritus, which is a term. And what does this term refer to? Dead plant remains such as leaves, bark, flowers, dead remains of animals, including fecal matter. These constitute the detritus. It's important to remember what is the meaning of detritus and what is this detritus. It is a raw material for decomposition. What do decomposers break down? Complex inorganic molecules. Where do we find these complex inorganic molecules? We find them in dead plant remains such as leaves, bark, flowers, dead remains of animals, or fecal matter. These will have the complex organic molecules, and decomposers will act on the detritus and it will break down to give simple inorganic molecules. And decomposition involves one, two, three, four, and five steps, mainly fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, and mineralization. We will see these one line explanation of what these steps are, or one paragraph at most. But before that, they gave example of a new term, or they introduced a new term, that is detritivores. An example is earthworm. What is detritivores? Detritivores are organisms which break down detritus into smaller particles. This process is called as fragmentation. What do detritivores do? They physically break down larger particles of detritus into smaller particles of detritus. Okay, that is the first process, fragmentation, only one line. Then coming to leaching. What is leaching? Water soluble inorganic nutrients. If there are any water soluble inorganic nutrients in the detritus, they will dissolve in the water and they will seep down into the soil horizon and they get precipitated as unavailable salt. This is again a one line definition of leaching. The second step, not much is given. Then that is the second step. Coming to catabolism, as we already heard the name before, when bacterial and fungal enzymes degrade detritus into simpler inorganic substances, this process is called as catabolism. Fungal and bacterial enzyme degrade detritus into inorganic substances. all these three steps, the first three steps, that is fragmentation, leaching, and catabolism, they do not happen at different time. For a specific detritus or a specific inorganic matter, all these three steps, fragmentation, leaching, happen at the same time or simultaneously, as described expressed by the NCERT. They will happen simultaneously on the detritus. Now coming to the first step known as humidification, and the fifth step, mineralization. We saw that the first three steps, that is fragmentation, leaching, and catabolism, simultaneously occur during the decomposition. And humidification and mineralization, when do they occur? They occur during decomposition in the soil. Humidification leads to the accumulation of dark color amorphous substance called as humus. What is this humus? It is a reserve of nutrients, a reservoir of nutrients. It is highly resistant to microbial action. After the most of the detritus is decomposed, the highly resistant, this is also organic matter, but is very resistant to microbial action. Its further decomposition rate is extremely slow. It is colloidal in nature. It is a reservoir of nutrients, and if this humus is further degraded, although it is very slow and very hard to decompose, if it is degraded by some microbes, persistent microbes, this releases inorganic nutrients, and this process of releasing of inorganic nutrients, which are basically nothing but minerals, is known as mineralization. Okay, that's about the basic steps involving decomposition. Decomposition is a largely oxygen requiring process. Decomposition mainly depends on oxygen. Catabolism is oxygen dependent or something like that. We need to understand this much here. And the rate of decomposition, it is controlled by many factors. One of them is chemical composition of the detritus. Like if the chemical composition of the detritus, it is, if the detritus is filled with lignin and chitin, which are persistent chemicals, which are very annoying to break down, which are very hard to break down. They should be hard because they act as protective coverings for organisms like insects and plants. They should be hard in nature. So because they are very resistant and persistent in nature, decomposition of lignin and chitin containing detritus takes much longer time, and it is decomposition of detritus containing nitrogen and water soluble substances like carbohydrates, that is basically sugars. This is much easier, and it is also much faster. Then this is the it depends on the chemical, like the rate of decomposition depends on the chemical composition of the detritus. That is one factor. Then it also depends on the particular climatic condition. Like if we see, the rotting of vegetables or fruits in summer season is much faster than compared to winter season. This is because the decomposition or the rotting rate depends on the temperature and climatic conditions as well. So when it is faster and when it is slower, temperature and soil moisture are the most important climatic factors regulate decomposition through their effects on the activities of soil microbes. Which environment decomposition is faster? In warm and moist or humid environment, this kind of environment favors decomposition. And opposite of that, where decomposition is slow, low temperature, cold temperature like in winter, less oxygen content, less moisture, anaerobiasis meaning less oxygen content, this inhibits decomposition, resulting in a buildup of organic materials. Okay, that's about decomposition. They gave a diagram here. Let's see the diagram. Diagrammatic representation of decomposition cycle in a terrestrial ecosystem. There is a tree here. There are leaves on a tree. A tree grows in the soil. Okay, and one of the leaves falls to the ground. Okay, it might be due to the wind, or maybe someone plucked this leaf. Some of the fallen leaves are eaten by the insects and other animals. Nutrients and energy enter the food web. Okay, this leaf is eaten by some kind of insect. This insect is eaten by a bird, and the bird is eaten by some other wolf, and so on. The energy in this leaf goes on transferring from next trophic level to another trophic level. That shows this arrow mark. Okay, some other nutrients. Okay, 2 minutes break. Break was longer than expected, but let's continue. Okay. A tree grows in a soil, a green leaf falls to the ground, some are eaten by insects and other animals. Nutrients and energy enter the food web. One of the way is it will enter the food web. Instead of entering the decomposition cycle, the energy will enter the food web. Another way is some nutrients leach into the soil by chemical action. Okay, there is one more method, and this will create an organic rich soil. Okay, that is one way. Next is leaves partially consumed by decomposers such as fungi and bacteria, they begin to lose form and become litter. And further decomposition by earthworms, bacteria, soil, mites, fungi, etc. And this will also give an organic rich soil. And what will an organic rich soil give? It will give plants, more nutrition to the plants. Okay, it's very simple. Let's go to energy flow. Except for the deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem, sun is the only source of energy for all ecosystems on earth. Of the incident solar radiation, less than 50% of it is photosynthetically active radiation, PAR or PAR. We know that plants and photosynthetic bacteria, autotrophs, fix sun's radiant energy to make food from simple inorganic materials. Plants capture only 2 to 10% of the PAR, and this small amount of energy sustains the entire living world. So it is very important to know how the solar energy captured by plants flows through different organisms of an ecosystem. Okay, excluding the deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem, this is also important to remember. It's an exclusion or an exception, so it's good to remember this. Sun is the only source of energy of all the ecosystems on earth. If we consider incident solar radiation, what does incident solar radiation mean? All the radiation or the all the sunlight that falls on the earth. Of this sunlight, all the sunlight that falls on the earth, less than 50%, less than 50% is photosynthetically active radiation. Meaning, photosynthetically active radiation meaning that this radiation can help in photosynthesis. If only less than 50% of the total solar radiation is actually can actually help in photosynthesis, remaining cannot help in photosynthesis. We know that plants and photosynthetic bacteria, those are autotrophs, they fix sun's radiant energy to make food from simple inorganic molecules. And out of this PAR, photosynthetic radiation, the plants capture only 2 to 10% of PAR, and this small amount of energy sustains the entire living world. So 100% is total radiation. If we assume 50% as PAR, then what plants utilize? Of PAR, plants utilize 2% to 10%. If total 100% if we take, of that plants utilize only 1% to 5%. From PAR, it is 2% to 10%. This is the calculation given in the textbook. In total sunlight, it is 1% to 5%. But it is important to remember what is given in the textbook, that is 2 to 10% of PAR. It is good to remember that itself. So, because of that reason, because like this small amount of energy sustains the entire living world, it is very important to know how the solar energy captured by plants flows through different organisms of an ecosystem. All organisms are dependent for their food on producers, either directly or indirectly. So you find unidirectional flow of energy from the sun to the producers, then to consumers. Is this in keeping with the first law of thermodynamics? Okay. All organisms are dependent on the producers for food. Okay, very easy to know that. This can be directly or indirectly. One more time here, unidirectional flow of energy. Why so? Because the energy flows from the main source of energy is the sun. The energy is utilized by the producers to produce food, and the producers are consumed by the consumers, and they will gain some energy. Okay, they asked a question. Is this keeping with the first law of thermodynamics? Let's see what the first law of thermodynamics is. Ecosystems do follow the first and second laws of thermodynamics because they are physical systems governed by energy flow and transformation. First law of thermodynamics, energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. In ecosystems, sunlight transforms into chemical energy that is done by plants capture solar energy via photosynthesis and convert it into chemical energy stored in organic molecules. Energy transfer, herbivores eat plants, carnivores eat herbivores, and decomposers recycle the organic matter. Energy flow, the total energy entering the ecosystem, that is mainly the sunlight, equals the energy transformed into biomass, heat, and other forms. Example, the energy stored in grass is transferred to a cow and eaten, then to humans when they consume the meat. No energy is lost, it only changes from chemical, mechanical to heat. Second law of thermodynamics, entropy increases. Every energy transfer increases entropy. Energy transformations are never 100% efficient, meaning in an ecosystem there will be heat loss. At each trophic level, a large portion of energy is lost as heat during metabolism, respiration, and movement. Energy pyramid. We'll see more about this later in later topics of the same chapter, but let's just let's just read it once. Energy pyramid. Only 10% of the energy is passed from one trophic level to the next. The rest dissipates as unusable heat. Entropy rise. Ecosystem require a constant input of solar energy to maintain order and structure because energy degrades into less useful forms over time. Okay, let's see this again when the concerned topic occurs. First law of thermodynamics, energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. Okay, it is following. Further, ecosystems are not exempt from the second law of thermodynamics. As energy transfer increases, entropy also increases. As energy keeps on transferring, entropy increases. Large portion of energy is lost as heat during metabolism, respiration, and movement. Only 10% of the energy is passed from one trophic level to the next trophic level. Entropy rise. Ecosystems require a large amount of solar energy input to maintain order and structure because energy degrades into less useful forms over time. Okay. They need a constant supply of energy to synthesize the molecules they require. One more way of phrasing. Same thing. to counteract the universal tendency towards increasing disorderliness. We know that entropy keeps on increasing, so we need constant supply of energy to synthesize molecules and counteract the entropy. The green plant in the ecosystem are called as producers. In a terrestrial ecosystem, major producers are herbaceous and woody plants. Likewise, producers in an aquatic ecosystem are various species like phytoplankton, algae, and higher plants. You have read about the food chains and webs that exist in nature. Nothing much important here. It might be important, but like very basic information. That's all. They're just saying like the major producers are herbaceous woody plants in terrestrial ecosystem, then planktons and algae or higher plants in aquatic ecosystem. Okay, starting from the plants or producers, food chains or rather webs are formed such that an animal feeds on a plant or on other animal and in turn is food for another. A chain or web is formed because of this interdependency. Okay, what is a food chain? When one organism is eaten by the another organism and energy is transferred, and these the next organism is again eaten and so on. This constitutes a food chain, and it is more complex than a simple chain. Like uh, it's not that grass can only be eaten by a goat or only be eaten by a cow. It can be eaten by all kinds of herbivores or even insect in that matter. So it constitutes or it forms a complex web called as the food web. No energy is trapped. This is an important statement. No energy that is trapped into an organism remains in it forever. This can be framed using a statement type question as a statement type question. Then let's continue. The energy trapped by the producers hence is either passed on to the consumer or the organism dies. Death of the organism is the beginning of the detritus food chain or the detritus food web. Just because an organism dies doesn't mean the energy is lost. It will start a new cycle, that is like the detritus food cycle, detritus food chain. All animals depend on plants. It can be directly or indirectly for their food needs. They are hence called consumers or heterotrophs. If they feed on the producers, the plants, they are called as primary consumers. And if the animals eat other animals, which in turn eat the plants or they produce, they are called as secondary consumers. Likewise, if organisms eat some organism eats secondary consumers or feeds on secondary consumer, and it is called as tertiary consumers. Obviously, the primary consumers will be herbivores. Such common herbivores are insects, birds, mammals, terrestrial ecosystem, and mollusks in aquatic ecosystem. The consumers that feed on these herbivores are carnivores, or more correctly called as primary carnivores. Those secondary consumers, those animals that depend on the primary carnivores for food, are labeled as secondary carnivores. Very basic information. A simple grazing food chain, GFC, is depicted below. Grass is a producer, eaten by a goat, a primary consumer, man, a secondary consumer. I won't say so on. It would have been better if it was something else here. The detritus food chain, DFC, begins with dead organic matter. It is made up of decomposers, which are heterotrophic organisms, mainly fungi and bacteria. Okay, that is the grazing food chain. Mainly, we will see two types of food chain in our chapter. That is the grazing food chain, which is very common and everybody knows. Next is the detritus food chain, although very common in nature, slightly uncommon or not specifically introduced, but we will see it here in our 12th class. Detritus food chain, DFC, begins with dead organic matter. It is made up of decomposers. What is DFC made up of? It is made up of decomposers. It constitutes decomposers which are heterotrophic organisms. These decomposers are mainly fungus and bacteria. They meet their energy and nutrient requirements by degrading dead organic matter or detritus. These are also known as saprotrophs, which we are very familiar with. Sapro meaning to decompose. Decomposers secrete digestive enzymes that break down dead and waste materials into simple inorganic material which are subsequently absorbed by them. In an aquatic ecosystem, GFC is the major conduct for energy flow. As against this, in terrestrial ecosystem, a much larger fraction of energy flows through the detritus food chain than through GFC. Detritus food chain may be connected with the grazing food chain at some levels. Some of the organisms of DFC are prey to the GFC animals, and in a natural ecosystem, some animals like cockroaches, crows, etc. are omnivores. These natural interconnection of food chains make it a food web. Okay, let's just mark the important information here. This is basic information, everything is easy to remember. Begins with dead organic matter made up of decomposers, heterotrophic organisms, they are mainly fungus and bacteria, meet their energy nutrient requirement by degrading dead and organic matter, called as saprotrophs, secrete digestive enzymes, break down dead waste materials. Okay, this is very important information here. In aquatic ecosystem, GFC, that is a grazing food chain, is a major conduit of energy flow. And but in terrestrial ecosystem, against this, much larger fraction of energy flows through detritus food chain than through grazing food chain. In aquatic ecosystem, like grazing food chain has more energy flow than detritus food chain. But in terrestrial ecosystem, detritus food chain has higher energy flow than grazing food chain. And that is the main important point. And one more thing is a specific extra information. Detritus food chain may be connected with grazing food chain at some levels. How it can be connected? Some of the organisms of DFC like can be prey to grazing food chain animals, and in natural ecosystems, some animals like cockroaches. In a natural ecosystem, cockroaches, crows, etc. are omnivores. And what is a food web? It is a natural interconnection of food chain that is called a food web. How would you classify human beings? We are also omnivores. So technically we intrude in every single food chain. We can pretty much use everything. So we can be a part of all trophic levels. Organisms occupy a place in the natural surroundings or in a community according to their feeding relationship with other organisms. Organisms occupy a place. No, okay, let's read first. Based on the source of their nutrition or food, organisms occupy a specific place in the food chain that is known as their trophic level. Producers belong to the first trophic level, herbivores, the primary consumer, and second, and carnivores, secondary consumer, to the third. The important point to notice is the amount of energy decreases at successive trophic levels. When any organism dies, it is converted to detritus or dead biomass that serves as an energy source for decomposers. Organisms at each trophic level depend on those at lower trophic level for their energy demands. Each trophic level has a certain mass of living material at a particular time called as standing crop. The standing crop is measured as the mass of living organisms, biomass, or the number in a unit area. The biomass of a species is expressed in terms of fresh or dry weight. Measurement of biomass in terms of dry weight is more accurate. Why? The number of trophic levels in the grazing food chain is restricted as a transfer of energy follows 10% law. Only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level from the lower trophic level. In nature, it is possible to have so many levels: producer, herbivore, primary carnivore, secondary carnivore in the grazing food chain. Okay, let's see. Organisms occupy a place in the natural surrounding or in a community according to their feeding relationship. Basically, they're talking about a hierarchy in the organisms, like deer, lion. We know their hierarchy, like how the plants, that specific, depending on their specific feeding relationship, they occupy a certain hierarchy in the specific ecosystem, and this level is known as a trophic level. This specific place in the food chain is known as a trophic level. Organisms occupy a place in natural surroundings according to their feeding relationship with other organisms, source of their nutrition or food, occupy specific place in food chain known as trophic level. Producers belong to first trophic level, herbivores second, carnivores third. I give examples here. Diagrammatic representation of trophic levels in an ecosystem. It is generally represented by a pyramid, but it's okay. Producer, the first trophic level, phytoplankton, grass, trees. Primary consumers, second trophic level, herbivore, zooplankton, grasshopper, and cow. Third trophic level, carnivore, birds, fishes, and wolf. Fourth trophic level, that is the top carnivore, and this is the secondary consumer, this is the tertiary consumer. Fourth trophic level, that is the top apex carnivore, that is either a lion or a man. Very basic example. Okay, the important point to note in an energy flow is that energy decreases at successive trophic levels. We will know more about this as we see the ecological pyramids. This is known as the 10% law. Amount of energy decreases as we go from one trophic level to other trophic level. Any organism dies, it is converted into detritus, dead biomass, which will serve as energy source for decomposers. Organisms at each trophic level depend on those at the lower trophic level for their energy demands. Okay, that is about that. Now a new term called as standing crop is introduced here. Each trophic level, when we consider primary producers, if we count the amount of biomass or the number of plants there is at a certain amount or a certain instant of time, at a particular time, instead of saying a certain instant, it's correct to say a particular time, like today morning at 10 a.m. How many plants were there at a specific area? So when we measure that, it can be either be biomass or the number of plants. That biomass or the number of plants measured at today morning 10 a.m. is called as a standing crop. The standing crop is measured as the mass of living organisms or the number in a unit area. We measure it per unit area. Biomass is expressed in terms of fresh or dry weight. Measurement of dry weight is more accurate. Why? Because as season changes or climatic changes, wet, like the moisture content or water content, may reduce or may show drastic changes, which is not very accurate in representing the biomass. So it is much more preferable to use dry weight. The number of trophic levels in the grazing food chain is restricted. Number of trophic levels in the grazing food chain is restricted, very important. Like we cannot just have 100th trophic level. That's very hard because like the energy will be lost. Like most of the energy is lost and it is hard to sustain. Like the number of trophic levels is very hard. The transfer of energy follows the 10% law. Only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level from the lower trophic level. They asked, do you think is there any limitation in a detritus food chain? Well, energy there, energy here, both are energy. So technically there will be a limitation as energy will decrease. Why in the first place the energy will be lost? In a logical sense, I have explained before with a example of a plant growth. Like if a cow eats a plant, in gross primary productivity and net primary productivity, of all the sunlight absorbed by the plant, most of it was lost as respiratory losses and other losses of the plant. Only the remaining net primary energy was given to the cow at the next trophic level. So again the cow will produce some organic matter using the energy taken from the plant, but once again the cow has to move, the cow has to grow, the cow has to reproduce, and all these functions will require energy. So it will lose much of the gained energy and only 10% will be remained for the lion or wolf which will eat the cow, and next so on. Even in a detritus food chain, it might be possible. Energy flow through different trophic levels. They gave just a basic diagram. Sun gives energy, first trophic level, producers, plants, next trophic level, secondary trophic level, primary consumers, herbivores, insect, next is third trophic level or secondary consumers, carnivores, it can be a bird, again showing heat loss here, fourth trophic level consumers, top carnivores. It can also be, plants can also be eaten by whatever these guys are, these insects, and all these trophic level organisms can eat these as well, and they will also release heat. Okay, no, these are decomposers. No, these are decomposers, probably. Well, okay. Coming to ecological pyramids, I think this is the last topic. Yeah, this is the last topic of this chapter. Ecological pyramids. You must be familiar with the shape of a pyramid. Well, even if we are not familiar with the shape of a pyramid, we are certainly familiar with the shape, I mean, with the name of a pyramid, the Egyptian pyramids, wonders of the world. It is very hard to not know of the name of a pyramid. Okay, so if we knew about the Egyptian pyramids, we should very well know the shape of them as well. A triangular shape, a pyramid. It looks like a triangle, but let's assume it's pyramid here. Okay, these are pyramids. Pyramid. I don't need to write that. Okay, ecological pyramids. You must be familiar with the shape of a pyramid. The base of a pyramid is broad and it narrows towards the apex. At the bottom of the pyramid, it is very wide, but as we go from bottom to top, the pyramid will get narrower. One gets a similar shape whether you can express the food or energy relationship between organisms at different trophic levels. Okay, we will get this shape when we represent different trophic levels, energy relationship, or when you express food or energy relationship between organisms of different trophic levels. We studied about the trophic levels. Now we want to express them in terms of pyramids, or in terms of their energy relationship. When we express them like that, it will be a shape of a pyramid. This relationship is expressed in terms of number, okay, biomass and energy. Mainly, the ecological pyramids are mainly used to study this. Ecological pyramids are schematic representation of mainly three categories. Most common categories are: one, energy relationship; two, biomass; and three, number of organisms. This is the standing crop, meaning at a specific period of time. The number of organisms at a specific period of time, that is called as a standing crop. Like I gave an example of today morning 10 a.m. how many plants in a specific location. That kind. Okay. This relationship is expressed in terms of number, biomass, and energy. The base of each pyramid represents the producers or the first trophic level, while the apex represents tertiary or top level consumer. The three types of ecological pyramids that are usually studied are the pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, pyramid of energy, as I showed before. I mean, as I wrote here before. Okay, the first one we see is the pyramid of numbers in a grassland ecosystem. Only three top carnivores are supported in an ecosystem based on production of nearly 6 million plants. Okay, what a wonder. Producer, this is the first trophic level, primary consumer, second trophic level, secondary consumer, third trophic level, and tertiary consumer, fourth trophic level. If we assume the standing crop is 60 lakh or 5,842,000 of plants, they support 708,000 primary consumers and 354,000. These primary consumers support 354,000 secondary consumers, and based on this pyramid here, we can assume that these secondary consumers support three tertiary consumers. Okay, this shows how much of the energy produced by the primary consumers is lost, secondary consumers is lost, and tertiary consumer, secondary consumers is lost, not primary consumers. Producers is lost, and primary consumers energy is lost, secondary consumers also energy is lost. Much of the energy is utilized by these organisms, and only the remaining part is left for our tertiary consumers. Okay, this is a pyramid of biomass. It shows a sharp decrease in biomass at higher trophic levels. This is a pyramid of biomass. Once again, producers, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. If we assume the dry weight of the producers is 809 kg per meter cube, it will be reduced to 37, then 11, then 1.5. This is still again based on the standing crop calculation, meaning at a specific time only. This is not continuous. And we see a peculiar example here. It's an inverted pyramid of biomass, small standing crop of phytoplankton. It supports large standing crop of zooplankton. Okay, till here we understood, like, because there will be an energy loss, the pyramid will be getting narrower at the top. So, considering all that, why is the pyramid? This is a pyramid of phytoplankton in phytoplankton and zooplankton. This is a sea pyramid. Based on a sea ecosystem. Sea ecosystem. Why is this possible? Why is only 4 phytoplankton sustain 21 primary consumer? It is because primary consumer, this is the phytoplankton, which have a rapid reproduction capability, meaning this is again because it is a standing crop of phytoplankton only at a specific time. If we assume that the phytoplanktons are keep on getting eaten by the primary consumer, the phytoplanktons have such a devastating reproduction ability that they continue to reproduce even though they are continuously getting eaten. Because of their rapid reproduction capability, much larger or much better than these primary consumers or other plants, even though they have a much lesser standing crop, they can support a large number of zooplankton. At a specific time, there will be less number of phytoplankton, but they will be inexhaustible, meaning they will keep on reproducing. Even if they will be eaten, they will keep on reproducing. So they can support a large number of zooplankton. And this is much easier. This is the last pyramid, an ideal pyramid of energy. Observe the primary producers convert only 1% of the energy in the sunlight available to them into net primary productivity. If there is 1 million joules of sunlight, only 1%, that is 10,000 joules, is converted into energy by the primary consumers. Then only 1000 joules, 10% law, is passed to the primary consumer, 100 joules to the secondary consumer, and 10 joules to the tertiary consumer. And once again, this is an ideal pyramid of energy. Any calculations of energy content, biomass, or numbers has to include all organisms at that trophic level. No generalizations we make will be true if we take only a few individuals at any trophic level into account. Also a given organism may occupy more than one trophic level. Here it's an interesting example given here. I'll highlight it later again. Simultaneously, one must remember that the trophic level represents a functional level, not a species as such. A given species may occupy more than one trophic level in the same ecosystem at the same time. For example, a sparrow is a primary consumer when it eats seeds, fruits, peas, and a secondary consumer when it eats insects and worms. Can you work out how many trophic levels human beings function at in a food chain? We function at all possible trophic levels, maybe except producers, but we produce electricity using solar cells or solar panels, so we are harvesting the sun's energy as well. So technically that can be considered as producers, maybe in an artificial sense. In most ecosystems, all the pyramids of number, of energy, and biomass are upright. That is, producers are more in number and biomass than herbivores, and herbivores are more in number and biomass than carnivores. Also, energy at a lower trophic level is always more than at higher trophic level. There are exceptions to this generalization. If you were to count the number of insects feeding on a big tree, what kind of pyramid would you get? Obviously, an inverted pyramid. Now add an estimate of the number of small birds depending on the insects. Also the number of large birds eating the smaller birds. It would be an inverted pyramid, or yes, probably an inverted pyramid. The pyramid of biomass in a sea is generally inverted because the biomass of fishes far exceeds that of phytoplankton. Isn't that a paradox? I explained it how that works. Because of the high reproduction capability of the phytoplanktons, pyramid of energy is always upright. We are specifically talking about the pyramid of energy. It will always be upright and can never be inverted, as energy can not be created, because when energy flows from one particular level to another trophic level, some energy is always lost. If we represent it as an inverted pyramid, it will indicate that energy is gained, which is not possible. It must be it cannot be inverted and must be upright. Each bar in the energy pyramid indicates the amount of energy present at each trophic level in a given time or annually per unit area. However, there are certain limitations of ecological pyramids, such as it does not take into account the species belonging to two or more trophic levels. Like the sparrow we saw, it assumes a simple linear food chain, which is almost impossible to exist in nature, never exists in nature. It does not accommodate a food web. Moreover, we do not consider the food web. Moreover, saprophytes are not given any place in ecological pyramids, even though they play a vital role in the ecosystem. These are the drawbacks. Okay, once again, let's read it. I'll highlight the important points in blue. Yes, you must be familiar with the shape of a pyramid. Okay, that is not important. The ecological pyramids are mainly number, biomass, or energy. Base of each pyramid represents the producers. Apex represents tertiary or top level consumer. The three types of ecological pyramids are pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, pyramid of energy. Any calculation of energy content, biomass, or numbers has to include all organisms at that trophic level. It is a must to include all the species, all the organisms at that trophic level. It is generalizations will not be appropriate. A given organism may occupy more than one trophic level simultaneously. And what is a trophic level? One must remember an important note about a trophic level. Trophic level represents a functional level. It does not represent a species. What is a trophic level? We saw before, it is the place of a given organism depending on the interrelationship for food, or basically for food, like what part it is playing in the food chain. It is not a specific species we are talking about. We cannot say an insect occupies always the second or primary trophic level, the second trophic level or the third trophic level. It can occupy any trophic level depending on the circumstance or the situation or the ecosystem. And it can occupy a single species or a same type of organism can occupy one or more trophic levels in the same type of ecosystem at the same time. A given species may occupy more than one trophic level in the same ecosystem at the same time. Example is sparrow is a primary consumer when it eats seed, fruit, peas, the secondary consumer when it eats insects. In most ecosystem, all the pyramids of number, this is also important to remember. Most of the ecological pyramids are upright. Producers are more in number and biomass than herbivores. Herbivores are more in number and biomass than carnivores. Energy at lower trophic level is more than at higher trophic level. There are some exceptions. If you were to count number of insects feeding on a big tree, and this example here, the pyramid of biomass in sea is generally inverted because the biomass of fishes far exceeds the phytoplankton. And this is important, pyramid of energy is always upright and can never be inverted, because when energy flows from particular trophic level to next trophic level, some energy is lost as heat at each step. Each bar in the energy pyramid indicates the amount of energy present at each trophic level in a given amount of time or annually per unit area. Limitations of ecological pyramids are: do not take into account same species belonging to two or more trophic levels, assume simple food chain, which is impossible in nature almost, does not accommodate a food web. Saprophytes are not given any place in the ecological pyramids, even though they play a vital role in the ecosystem. That's it with the chapter. Let's read the summary. Summary: an ecosystem is a structural and functional unit of nature, and it comprises abiotic and biotic components. Abiotic components are inorganic materials such as air, water, soil, whereas biotic components are producers, consumers, and decomposers. Each ecosystem has characteristic physical structure resulting from interaction amongst abiotic and biotic components. Species composition and stratification are the two main structural features of an ecosystem. Based on source of nutrition, every organisms occupy a place in the ecosystem. Productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling are the four important components of an ecosystem. Primary productivity is the rate of capture of solar energy or biomass production of the producers. It is divided into two types: gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. Rate of capture of solar energy or total production of organic matter is called as GPP. NPP is the remaining biomass or the energy left after utilization of producers. Secondary productivity is the rate of assimilation of food energy by the consumers. In decomposition, complex organic compounds of detritus are converted to carbon dioxide, water, and inorganic nutrients by the decomposers. Decomposition involves three processes, namely the fragmentation of detritus, leaching, and catabolism. Energy flow is unidirectional. First, plants capture solar energy and then food is transferred from the producers to decomposers. Organisms of different trophic levels in nature are connected to each other for food or energy relationship, forming a food chain. The storage and movement of nutrient elements through the various components of the ecosystem is called nutrient cycling. Nutrients are repeatedly used through this process. Nutrient cycling is of two types. Okay, this is new information given here. The storage and movement of nutrient cycling. Okay, plants capture solar energy and then food is transferred from producers to decomposers. Organisms of different trophic levels in nature are connected to each other for food or energy relationship, forming a food chain. The storage and movement of nutrient elements through the various components of the ecosystem is called as nutrient cycling. They did not mention a definition in the chapter, they mentioned it in the summary here. What is nutrient cycling? Then the storage and movement of nutrient elements through the various components of the ecosystem is called as nutrient cycling. Storage and movement of nutrient elements through the various components of the ecosystem is called as nutrient cycling. Nutrient cycling is of repeatedly nutrients are repeatedly used to this process. Nutrient cycling is of two types, that is gaseous and sedimentary. Atmosphere or hydrosphere is the reservoir for the gaseous type of cycle, carbon, whereas Earth's crust is the reservoir for sedimentary type phosphorus product of the ecosystem process are named as ecosystem services. Example, purification of air and water by forest. Okay, this last line here is something not in the NCERT, so it's very good to remember this. Atmosphere or hydrosphere is the reservoir for the gaseous cycle, gaseous type of nutrient cycle, that is carbon as carbon dioxide and so on, carbon dioxide, oxygen and so on. And Earth's crust is the reservoir for sedimentary type, that is phosphorus, nitrogen, etc. And that is about the nutrient cycling. Nutrient cycling is the storage and movement of nutrient elements through the various component of the ecosystem is called as nutrient cycling. Storage and movement of the nutrients to various component of the ecosystem is known as nutrient cycling. Two types, gaseous and sedimentary. Gaseous is meaning like nutrient. What does this nutrient cycling mean? Like it is just nutrients getting transferred or cycled through various parts of the components. What is a nutrient in air? What is a gaseous nutrient? It can be carbon dioxide, oxygen. Carbon dioxide is a nutrient for photosynthesis. Oxygen is a nutrient for respiration. I'm not sure if it can be called a nutrient, but it's an essential component for these essential vital life processes. So in gaseous, like where does this carbon dioxide or oxygen is stored? It's stored in the atmosphere or the hydrosphere. Like hydrosphere meaning in oceans, like carbon dioxide or oxygen is dissolved in the oceans for fishes and so on. Then in case of a sedimentary in the name itself implies like other organic or inorganic compounds which get dissolved in the soil, increase the fertility of the soil, like maybe in case of phosphorus an example. Then that's about the nutrient cycling. Then one more line here, products of the ecosystem, products of ecosystem processes, like many ecosystem process like purification of air, like photosynthesis is an ecosystem process, and the product of it is oxygen. And this the products of ecosystem process are named as ecosystem services. Ecosystem is giving us a service, giving the world a service by purifying the air and water by the forests. Forest is a part of the ecosystem. Okay, thanks ecosystem.